Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Termolin. I'm the Vice President for Institute Advancement at RPI, and it's a privilege and honor to welcome you here this evening. We really have a special event lined up for you this evening, and I want to thank all of you for being here. I know as I was chatting to some of our guests, our alumni, a couple told me it was their first RPI event ever. I know we had some folks who drove 2.5 hours through traffic to join us today, so it's just great to have you here. It really is a special occasion. And so we're going to have a program. After the program, we'll invite you to grab more food. We'll have the dessert station open. And like I said, it promises to be a really lovely evening. It is my pleasure this evening to start the program to introduce the 19th president of RPI, President Martin Schmidt, class of '81 from RPI. Marty left RPI, went to MIT where he received his Ph.D. and spent 41 years at MIT, most recently as the provost at MIT, overseeing all of the academics and all the financial aspects of MIT. Became president a year ago, July, and we're just thrilled to have him here as our leader. So with no further ado, let me introduce to you President Martin Schmidt.
I actually want to bring our guest of honor up because he's the star of the show. So, Reid, you want to come up? And we're going to jump right into it. I'll give brief.
All right. Thanks, Marty.
So really, Reid needs no introduction, but in brief, we all, I think, know and are extremely proud that Reid is a graduate of RPI, class in 1997, as we talked, Reid, as soon as he graduated from RPI, went into the Navy and went straight to flight school. Or what do you call it? Flight school?
Flight school.
Flight school. Flew a bunch of combat missions, I think you said maybe 80, and then made another career shift into the Astronaut Corps. And that's why we're here today, is really to celebrate Reid and all of his accomplishments and talk to him. But as many of you know, Reid is and I'm going to read off my iPad, so I apologize for that, but I want to get it right. Reid is the latest in a line of Rensselaer people who have made important contributions to space exploration. First among them, of course, is my predecessor in the president's office, George Lowe. George was of the class of 1948 and 1950, and he served as RPI's 14th president. He was one of the architects of NASA. He wrote the 1961 report that convinced President Kennedy that the US could get to the moon before the decade was out. Then, after the tragic fire during the Apollo 1 launch that killed the 3 astronauts, Lowe is reported to effectively have saved the Apollo program by leading the redesign of the command module, including its all 2 million parts. There then was the astronaut Jack Swigert, who was of the class of 1965. He coined the immortal phrase, "Houston, we have a problem." Although I'm told, and maybe you can correct this if I got it wrong, that what he actually said was, "Houston, we've had a problem here." This is what my historians tell me.
We're going to believe them. So just today, we'll believe them.
Okay.
No, I think they're 100% right.
All right, good. And those of you who saw the movie Apollo 13, we were sort of commiserating that somehow Tom Hanks got that line instead of Kevin Bacon, who was playing Jack Swigert. So I think it's important that we set the record here amongst RPI fans that it was in fact Swigert that said that. He was the last-minute replacement for the command module pilot of the Apollo 13 mission. That crew was about 200,000 miles from the Earth when an oxygen tank blew up in the service module, and many of you know the history there and the remarkable return to Earth that was orchestrated through amazing engineering driven by amazing people. In addition to Jack, Marta Boehn-Meyer of the class of 1979 was the first woman crew member assigned to the SR-71 Blackbird research program for NASA. as well as chief engineer for NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center. Now, how do you pronounce Rick's last name?
Rick Mastracchio.
Rick Mastracchio, thank you, Reid. He was class of 1987. He conducted 9 spacewalks, flew on 3 space shuttle missions, and served 6 months on the International Space Station. You served how long on the International Space Station?
165 days, but I was also Rick's backup crew member, so I got to train in Russia with him. He's a really unique guy, really, really smart.
That's great. We're going to be here all night because this man has amazing stories to share. But the story of RPI and the space program continues on even today. Our faculty and researchers have actually conducted a number of experiments in the microgravity environment of space and made important contributions in the engineering for space exploration. So it's clear that without a lot of the graduates of RPI, we would not have had that kind of impact. Okay, I've got to close that. So now I want to say a few more words about Reid. As I said, after he graduated from RPI in 1997 with his degree in computer and systems engineering, he was commissioned through the Naval ROTC. He became a decorated pilot and then test pilot and served 2 deployments in the Middle East. He rose to the rank of captain. In 2006, he earned a master's degree in systems engineering from Johns Hopkins University. Reid joined NASA as part of the astronaut class of 2009. He spent, as he just said, he spent 165 days on the International Space Station for expeditions 40 and 41. He even joined RPI's 2014 reunion and homecoming weekend by a video call from space. So we're going to have to arrange that for Artemis.
That might be tough. We'll try.
Okay. Well, at least wear the RPI hockey t-shirt.
That I can almost promise you. I'll take that up with me.
So after those missions, Reid was appointed NASA's chief astronaut in 2020 and was in charge of developing other astronauts and assigning them to specific roles and missions. I think we kind of decided, Rebecca Doors, our new provost at RPI, is here. I think we kind of decided that makes you the provost of the astronaut corps.
Pretty much.
Yeah, which is a tough job. However, in April of this year, he was named commander of the Artemis II mission, which will conduct a lunar flyby. This will be the first, as many of you know, the first crewed mission to leave low Earth orbit since 1972. And in talking with Reid, and I think this will come out in the conversation, I think what's exciting about it is when many of us reflect back on that fateful time when we first landed a man on the moon, the excitement in the nation, the passion that created for people to study STEM-centric majors. You feel with this momentum building to going back to the moon that it'll be another one of those moments, I think, where the inspiration and passion for what science can do to advance society will be reignited. And so I think it's really wonderful what you're doing there, Reid. So please, let's all welcome Reid to our community. Thank you. Unfortunately, Reid's daughters weren't able to join us, but we wish them well. And we also want to welcome Ms. Liz Shasheri, who's with us, Reid's friend, joining us tonight. So thank you for being here, Liz. Okay, we have a couple of questions, and then I'll talk about it, but we've actually got some questions that students at RPI wanted me to ask you. So we'll kind of rocket through these, not to use an analogy. So Reid, let's start with one that should be simple. Tell us about the goals of Artemis II and the ultimate goals of the Artemis program.
Let's start, I guess, with the ultimate goals of the Artemis program. In my view, is to see humans on the surface of Mars and beginning to explore further into the solar system. If we really back that up a bit from that grand strategy, the overarching idea of Artemis is to have a permanent and sustainable presence on the moon and in the lunar vicinity. So at the Gateway, which is an orbiting outpost laboratory in a distant orbit around the moon, a very stable orbit out there. And then the specifics of Artemis II, it is really just, it's the first time crew is going to ride in Orion. That's fairly representative Orion spacecraft behind us. We did an uncrewed mission last year with Artemis I. It was very successful, but this is the first time we'll have a life support system. First time we'll have a waste facility, food. First time we'll have 4 crew members on board. And we are going to go fly this thing off of Kennedy Space Center, do 2 orbits of the Earth, and then head out to the moon. And just really check out Artemis II, the spacecraft, so that when we put our friends on it, and Artemis III, and expect them to go land on the lunar surface, that we've already checked out all the manual systems, all the backup capabilities, and hand them a really well thought out spacecraft so they can focus on the extremely complicated task of taking a SpaceX lander down to the surface of the moon. That's what we want to do. We just think about our entire fundamental reason for being is to make things better for Artemis III and our crew members that are going to ride these future Artemis missions.
And we had, if you haven't seen the capsule, it's kind of stunning to think of 4 people packed in that.
I don't mind small spaces, but when we did a tour of Johnson Space Center earlier today, and everybody that looked in Orion was like, "Really? You're gonna put 4 people in there for 9.2 days?" But like that doesn't bother us. And our Canadian Jeremy Hansen, he's like 6'2", and so I think we could have done a little bit better picking short crew members, but he'll take up a lot of volume.
Well, I suspect it's probably a tenth the size of your freshman dorm room with your college roommate, Mark Eigner, who's with us tonight.
We should call out Mark. Mark, you need to stand up. Mark endured 4 years with me at RPI. And I know we're probably on a tight timeline, but this dude is in Mensa. So I would be going to school, studying all day, all night, all Saturday, all Sunday, and Mark would be out back with a hibachi cooking hamburgers, and he's like, "Hey, if you go to class tomorrow, can you just bring me home the homework and I'll just turn it in next week?" I mean, the guy breezed through everything, and I was back at RPI in 2015, and we did some big talk with the president at that time, and Mark asked a question from the audience, and he's like, "Why do you have Reid up on stage? Why don't you have the successful roommate up there?" Because he has had a magnificent career. And Mark, I know you live up in New York. Thanks for coming in. It's great.
That's great.
Yes, he did say that. Yep.
Okay, so back for some time and space. It's interesting to reflect Apollo 17, 1972.
I wasn't born yet.
Yeah. 40 years have passed since we have a crewed moon mission. What's happened in the meantime?
1972, for those that lived through that, I mean, there's a lot of energy in that time. Soviet Union, President Kennedy, we had a huge budget at NASA. What we accomplished in the human space program in really 8 years, from 1961 with Alan Shepard doing the first suborbital flight to 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the lunar surface. Like, if we think about that in today's terms, in 8 years, we had never launched in space and we were landing on the moon. That's incredible to think about. After 1972, our budget shrank back down, and we actually started, I would say, almost right-sizing the program of, let's learn how to operate off of our planet. Let's go, and we built the space shuttle. Let's learn how to fly in low Earth orbit. Let's see what sort of science we can do without gravity and see what we can contribute back. And let's learn what happens to the human body for months, if not a year, in space with the International Space Station. And let's try to build an international team. And we've done all of that. We really know how the human body works in space. We know how to live and work off our planet. It's interesting, it's lost on everybody here, and it was even lost on me until our tour guide earlier, Laurie Wheaton, said, today is the 23rd anniversary of the first humans joining the International Space Station. So for 23 years, all of humanity has not lived on planet Earth. We have had people living off the planet for the last 23 years. So although it doesn't have that grand moment of Neil stepping on the lunar surface, which changed the whole world, we have been really busy learning about what is going on with our system, learning about science, and now we've built a really strong international team on the International Space Station, and we're projecting that forward into Artemis. So the last thing I want to say on this topic is, when we look forward at Artemis, it is is fundamentally different than Apollo. It is not the United States of America going in a space race to plant a flag on the moon and conduct geology research. It is us trying to align the entire planet to go live off of our planet, to go out to the moon, to make travel to the moon seem almost regular, like getting on a United airplane and heading over to London for the weekend and coming back. Like, that seems normal to us. 100 years ago, that was really far from normal. And so if we can start making this feel normal, making the impossible feel normal, it just opens up our eyes to what else we can achieve as humans. So I love that international aspect of Artemis. We have companies in France and Germany building our service module. We have 29 nations have signed the Artemis Accords for the peaceful use of the moon. So we are building a global community for exploration.
So that's an interesting segue to the next question, which is, you know, in many ways, the impetus of the Apollo mission was the space race competition with the Soviet Union. And you just talked about all this international cooperation, but there is a question, which is the current tension we're seeing in terms of economic and military competition with China, does that factor into thinking about this?
2 years ago, I would say absolutely not. China has a very robust human space program right now. They have a space station. They actually just launched and landed a crew very successfully earlier this week. And we monitor their program, but we do not cooperate. And you know, as a human being, I wish that we would, but on a geopolitical scale at times, we know that we can't. And I would just say a little competition is a healthy thing. So if China is setting their sights on the moon, I think that will help the international community want to move a little quicker and get after it.
Great. So I guess this question is sort of a reflection on your role as NASA's provost, or actually chief astronaut.
I like that. I'm going to tell Joe Acaba, who's the current chief, that he is now the provost. And I think as stressful as that job is, he'll take any other title than chief astronaut.
But as a provost, you are responsible for making sure great faculty are hired and promoted. And as chief astronaut, you select a crew for space missions. And you've talked about in the old days when the astronauts were all hair on fire test pilots. What's the thinking now about what makes a great astronaut?
We have 42 active astronauts right now. We hired a new class of 10 astronaut candidates who are in the process of graduating right now. Nicole Ayers from that class just got assigned to her first mission, so she'll launch soon. We have, you know, culture has changed, but we have also changed. My crewmate Victor Glover on Artemis II, he's got a great saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we're at the stage now where we want to go far. And we want team players. We want sharp technical people, but that is not the only skill we want. We want the people who are going to encourage each other, who are going to lift each other up when we're down. We want the people who are looking out for each other. Being in space, especially as an international crew for up to 6 months or a year, there are really bad days where you make a mistake and you need your friends there to help you out. And that's really what we're looking for. Plus, spending 6 months in a small, isolated environment, you want to make sure you're not going to strangle your crewmates while you're up there. So we put a lot of thought into crew and team dynamics and really trying to make it a very valuable and enriching experience. So it has changed, but I also think just culture has changed. It's a much more inclusive environment now, and it's just I think it's a much more pleasant thing to be a part of.
That's neat. I think another thing that's changed since Apollo is NASA's relationship with private companies in space. It's incredibly that you're relying on commercial development by companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin. As you think about that, what is NASA gaining from that approach as opposed to the old days?
I think we're all gaining from that. When you all leave here tonight, if you look over to that side in the parking lot out there, there's a huge 747 with a space shuttle on top of it. But there's also a SpaceX flown booster out there that delivered commercial resupply 13 to the International Space Station and then flew itself back to a barge in the Atlantic Ocean, landed and was towed in, and then they've donated that to Space Center Houston, and you can see the scorch marks towards the engines on that. And really this is being highlighted right now in Artemis, where NASA has set the vision of humanity sustainably working on the lunar surface. And then where we have gaps in technology and gaps in mission need, we are hiring in private industry to come fill those gaps. Intuitive Machines is a local company. A classmate of mine, Jack Fisher, is a vice president of Intuitive. It's right down the road on Space Center Houston. And NASA put out a contract to say we wanted a certain payload on the lunar surface, uncrewed, and Intuitive Machines said, we can absolutely do that. So we don't care how they do it, we just want that payload on the surface of the moon. So we are setting the vision, we have some seed money, and then we're letting people go and really explore the boundaries of what they can do. SpaceX, I mean, it's just incredible what they have presented. They now have flown 2 private missions to the space station through Axiom, another private company which is shepherding that. They've flown Inspiration 4, funded by Jared Isaacman, who commanded that first mission, and he has another one on the books. So NASA setting the commercial crew program to get crews to the International Space Station has now enabled multiple private missions. People can now buy their way to space. They can conduct their own research. I love that. It's you know, that is what we all wanted. Before I was hired as an astronaut at NASA, that's what I wanted. I wanted everybody to get access to space, and we're seeing that start to happen. And it can really let us focus on some bigger mission goals and then let the holes get filled in.
That's great. So you're not only a pioneer in space, but you're also in social media. And so what I learned was that you sent the first Vine videos.
Vine doesn't even exist anymore.
I know, I had to look it up, but I guess it's equivalent of Snapchat, maybe.
So Vine was created, I think 2013, maybe a little bit before that. But what was really neat in the age of when Twitter was really, that was it. Vine gave you a chance to do 6-second videos that were looping, infinite loops. And when I got to the space station, a lot of people had sent down pictures, and that had had a really big impact. I wanted to do that, but I wanted to try to put that life up there in motion. And the first thing that I saw when I was up there that I thought would be a really neat infinite looping Vine was, I don't know how deeply to go into this, but we were in a period of high beta, so our orbit around the Earth, as the Earth moves around the sun, sometimes we get 16 sunrises and sunsets a day, and then sometimes our orbital plane is always in sunlight. And as we were going around, I see some great space dorks nodding, and I love it. We're going around the Earth, and I looked out, and I noticed the sun never sets, but the sun is making a loop out the window. And I took a camera, and I just did 90 still frame pictures, and then I stitched those all together, and I made a 6-second video of the sun out the window when it was never setting, and the sun is just doing this circle out the window. And I was like, that's a perfect Vine. And then we started using Vine really heavily for sharing. It's really hard. You probably are faced with this. It's really hard to share visually how cool science is. And so I was going around the space station and just looking like what are we doing that I can share in 6-second clips? And I started to realize a picture of science doesn't resonate, but 6 seconds of motion of visually significant science can really have an impact. And so we started using Vine heavily to highlight the science on space station. And that was just a huge success because we actually started getting to really impact what we were doing scientifically on station.
Fantastic. What did you call them? Space dorks or
space nerds, space dorks? I don't know.
Space nerds. How many space nerds do we have today? There you go. All right. You can put 2 hands up. Okay.
Sorry, I'm way too informal. I apologize.
Yeah, it's shocking. We don't know what we're going to do with you. So your expedition to the International Space Station was particularly science intensive. Tell us about the science you've been asked to conduct as an astronaut.
You know, as an astronaut, we're really just operators. We are operators for other people's science. To me, the neatest part about doing science on the space station was that we're tied in real time with the principal investigator on the ground and their team. And usually they have video over the shoulder, and we're just working the comm system directly to their office. And some of my most fond memories of being in space were working with those PIs and watching their fascination as I was doing the experiments. When I flew in 2014, I'll be honest, I didn't think the science package was as robust as it could be. And now hearing from my friends that are coming back from the space station and the research that they're doing on heart cells and DNA and RNA and lung tissues, and we have rodent research going on. Mice really well model the same systems that the human body has, but in a much more rapid lifespan, so we can really see what's going on with brain and muscle atrophy and bone density loss on them as we send them to the space station. We have MRIs for them, and we do a lot of investigations on tissue that we bring back. When I was up there, the primary thing I would say I was doing was extremely basic science that removes the effect of gravity to see what happens. So we were liquefying and quenching metals to look at crystal structures. We were doing a lot with capillary flow and fluids. One of the things that I got put on, and I don't know why, I had to burn, I did this thing called BAS. It was like the burning and analysis. Oh, there's actually BAS. It was just on the screen right behind us. It's crazy. But I was just lighting different materials on fire in a contained environment to see how they would burn for future spacecraft development. A fire on board a spacecraft is just a horrible thing. So what materials burn, what materials don't burn, and how dependent is it on ventilation. So I was just changing amounts of ventilation, and it is really neat when you're burning something in microgravity. You turn the ventilation off and it's gone. It's really neat to see spherical flame, but I got put on that, and I did a lot of that research. And then primarily, we are test subjects ourselves. I was joking earlier, the limit for the science that I could conduct on my own body was an OSHA limit for how much blood I could withdraw from myself every week. So we do a lot of blood withdrawals. We spin it in a centrifuge, we freeze it, we send it down to Earth for analysis. I've ultrasounded all of my muscles in my legs, my heart, my eyes. I did that about every week just to see how was my muscle structure changing, what is changing with our eyes, what's changing with our cardiovascular system. All of that undergoes tremendous change when all you do is remove gravity. And so that was really, that was my main focus area. And I being from RPI, I loved all that. Like, I just could not get enough of all that.
Well, that actually, I want to go to the student questions next, but there was one other question and connects to your comment, which is, so RPI in a few short months will enter its 200th year and 200th anniversary. You've been a tremendous booster of RPI, and we really appreciate that. But when you think back, what aspects of your education in RPI do you think were particularly important for your success?
I make the joke all the time that I think the most important thing I learned at RPI was just failure resistance and how to overcome adversity. And anybody that goes to RPI can laugh at that. The breadth of engineering excellence, and I know it's not just an engineering school, but the breadth of engineering excellence that you have there, the access to premier professors and the TAs, I think really you get a lot of your education from the TAs while you're there. But just the breadth of that excellence that you can get, it builds a foundation. I look back at the people I went to RPI with, and very few of us ended up working in the field of our major, but all of us were very successful because of the foundation that was built at RPI. For me personally, it was that knowledge of being really successful in high school and then going to college and feeling what failure feels like, getting taken directly in the face day after day in engineering classes, and overcoming that and understanding that you can take a step back and then take 10 steps forward. And sometimes from failure comes your biggest victories, whether it's in science, engineering, or just in life. And so I definitely took that away from RPI. Great relationships. It's where I learned how to live away from my parents and survive. It's not easy as a freshman. Oftentimes your roommate wants to give up on you and move out. But that's where you build that solid foundation, and RPI did it in spades for me.
That's great. That's a story I think we all can connect to. So RPI offers a course called Space Vehicle Design.
Okay.
And the questions I want to ask you are questions that were posed by students in this class. And actually, I believe Kurt Anderson, I think you're here, are you not? Stand up, Kurt. So Kurt teaches the class.
Awesome.
And Kurt, I hope I get the pronunciations correct, but you can tell me later if I screwed it up. But thanks for facilitating these questions. So this is from Valerie Donachev. She's a senior in aeronautical engineering major. And her question is, how well do you understand the systems that make up your spacecraft? And what role does your RPI major in computer and systems engineering play in your understanding of those systems?
That's a great question. We have a lot of... RPI student, of course, it's a great question. We have a lot of flight controllers here from NASA, so maybe flight controllers or former flight directors, raise your hand. I know there's just a handful of them here, but those are the heroes that make human spaceflight successful. So they are working in mission control, and they are the system level experts. Environmental control and life support system. I know how to operate it, and I know if it fails, I know how to save my life. And beyond that, that's about my limit. it is up to them to dwell down into the deepest, darkest caves and really know what is going on with that life support system. And that is how we orchestrate it, because there is just you look at these complex machines all around us, there's just no way a human could have the capacity to know everything. So when I look at a system, I think I really scratch the surface. I know how they interact. Like, one of the most important things as an astronaut is knowing how do these different systems interact. So if I lose this system, what's going to happen over here? I really think about that all the time. And then I know my major emergencies. If we have a fire, if we have a depressurization, if we have a toxic leak in the atmosphere, those are the things that I need to be right on, and I need to know them. But where RPI, where that engineering education comes in extremely handy, is when we're building new spacecraft or when I'm learning, somebody can come up to me and talk to me about, we had an issue with Orion recently where there's an ECLSS control card, an environmental control life support control card, that has failed on a test bench. And they're talking to me about why it failed and where the diodes are, the resistors, the transistors, and where a capacitor probably should have been put that wasn't put, and it was getting backflow off the electrical motor. And in my brain, I'm like, got it, keep going. I love all this, it's great. And so that, like, having that engineering level to be able to think through on a scientific kind of engineering level to understand what is going on in the machine behind the curtain, I think that really does pay huge dividends when you can just fundamentally understand what is going on and then maintain that big picture.
So I want to take a pivot, because that reminded me of a story you shared about George Low and a gavel.
Yes.
And maybe that was an example of how George Low used his RPI education. Do you want to share that story?
I will try. I knew who George Low was when I went to RPI, and I salivated over some of the artifacts in the Low building. But I really didn't get to know him too well until recently. I asked an author, Andy Chaikin, who wrote A Man on the Moon, which became From the Earth to the Moon, a miniseries, which is fantastic, by the way, about Apollo. And I asked him about George Low, and he had done a lot of research on George Low and sent me all the passages that he had. And after the Apollo 1 fire, very tragic fire where 3 astronauts died, there were enormous issues with Apollo. And I do not think that they would have had anywhere near the success that they had, honestly, without that fire. That was a pivotal moment where we got a chance as an agency to stop and take stock in what was going wrong with Apollo. We were too focused on going fast, and I don't think we had a really good command and organizational structure to be making system-level decisions on the design of this vehicle. And George Low came in and he took over management of Apollo. And realize I'm talking only on things I've read, so there's probably people in this audience that could definitely fact check and tell the story better. But one of the things that George Low did was he immediately stood up a configuration control board. And any decision that dealt with any change on that spacecraft in the design and development had to come through his control board. And he sat at the front of that board and he would listen to the experts talk, and sometimes apparently these talks would go on well after hours and into the weekends. But he sat at the front of that table and he had a gavel. And he would listen to all the conversations, and when he had enough information, and it could have been 10 minutes or it could have been 2 weeks, but when he had the information that he needed, he would pick up that gavel and he would hit the table. And he would say, I have made the decision and here's what we're gonna do, and they would move forward. And that story is amazing to me, that he had that, it was that simple gavel, that idea in his head that there has to be a moment when a decision is made and there is no questioning from that point forward. The decision has been made and here is how we're doing it. And I think if he had just sat at the table without the gavel, it wouldn't have had that impact. It was that striking of the gavel, that 1 minute of decision is made, here's where we're going, next topic, let's move. We've got a mission to succeed at. And that was all from him.
That's cool. Kind of get goosebumps thinking
That's
about
awesome.
that. Yeah.
I want to, the more I read about him, the more I want to read about him. Here was a person who had essentially no leadership training. He was just heavily engineering trained and technically trained. This was a natural leader. He just understood how to lead human beings.
Yeah,
We should learn more.
So let's go back to Professor Anderson's class. So this is a question from Christy Fredo, a mechanical engineering senior. How would you compare the flight experience in fighter jets to the flight experience in a spacecraft?
We don't have enough time to get me started about fighters. So the experience in a fighter jet, longest I was ever in one was about 6.5 hours in a combat mission. There's a lot of similarities. You're on your own, sometimes with one crewmate. You have a lot of information in your head and you have to make real-time decisions that affect you and affect people on the ground and the livelihood of both. And you have to understand the machine well enough to operate it. So you have to know how to fly it, and then if it starts to fail on you, you have to know how to survive as best you can. I think spacecraft is very, very similar. Where spacecraft begins to diverge from that is instead of a 6-hour mission, now you're looking at a 6-month mission. And one of the things that I had to untrain myself on in spaceflight is in fighter aviation or in aviation in general, and hopefully the pilots that flew you here understand this. Where's Flake? Where's Scott Snow? My pilot buddy. Yep. Flew in the Navy with Scott, and his daughter is a freshman at RPI now. So he came in from San Antonio. But yes, she's got a lot of fun ahead. In aviation, there are moments where you absolutely must make that decision immediately because the lives are on the line. In spaceflight, you have to untrain that because sometimes making an immediate decision is really wrong. You have a whole ground team that you have to synchronize on what is going on with their spaceship. It is their spaceship and you are an operator of their spacecraft. How do you synchronize with this ground team? How do you communicate so that all 1,000 people on the ground and 4 people in space are on the exact same page of the playbook? And then you can slowly and methodically work your way through recovering the spacecraft, recovering the systems, and it's a very team-oriented response. When I first became an astronaut, I wanted to solve the problem immediately because I thought I could. I learned very quickly that I could not do that. If you get out of sync with your ground teams, you have created chaos for everybody. So
Wow.
that's probably the best way I can explain.
That's a great answer. So Austin Kwan is a senior in mechanical engineering, and he wants to know, what tips do you have for current RPI students in starting out a successful career?
Ask Mark. I think my career has been easy. I went into the military. I work at NASA. I think the people who impress me the most are the people who they have an idea and they go out and they start a company or they go and work for a company and then break off on their own. I think the big thing is just be ready to fail and be okay with failing a few times as you get your footing. I think that those are the people that we need right now. Like just being willing to understand you have that foundation and you will be successful. And even if the first few attempts are misfires, I think you got to just keep going down that road. As a government employee, I think that's my dream. Like if I could go back and do it and this wasn't my path, that's what I would want to do. And I would want to be able to have the confidence in myself to go fail trying to do something great because it takes a lot of effort to try to do that.
Great answer. Tyra Anderson is a senior in aeronautical engineering, and he asked, what was your path to becoming an astronaut, and why did you start down that path?
My path to becoming an astronaut was really ROTC at RPI. And I started down that. I wanted to drive trains when I was a kid. I wanted to be a train engineer. I wanted to be a conductor. That's probably why I got into engineering, because as a kid, I always thought being a train engineer would be the best, but the engineering I went into is slightly different. But I just love big machinery. My brother was in the Navy. I wanted to go in the Air Force. I was out with him in California, and I watched 2 F-18s kind of departing out of Miramar and going out to sea, and that was when my imagination was like, oh, they're going out to a ship. And they're probably not coming back for 6 months. And that sparked my imagination. And from that moment, I wanted to go in the Navy. I wanted to fly off of aircraft carriers. I had a few setbacks at RPI. I mean, Mark remembers when the Navy came back and told me I couldn't fly because I'd had eye surgery. And I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out a different path into the Navy to get a waiver process going. And I worked all that out. And then as I started flying, I realized, like, to me, flying in the Navy was the ultimate blend of all this engineering that I had learned at RPI and then watching it occur in an airplane. I loved that. And from that, I wanted to go back and become a test pilot to get deeper into all of that. And then all those paths just kind of lead towards, okay, this is like the ultimate team sport, the ultimate aviation, and that's how I wanted to come here.
That's wonderful. Okay, so Jacob Steingart is a senior in mechanical engineering. His question is, was there any particular coursework that you recall that specifically prepared you for your career in the astronaut corps?
I'd say a lot of it. Oddly, computer organization and logic design, which we took with Professor
Cold.
cold. I actually deployed on an aircraft carrier and took my cold book with me, and all my squadron mates were making so much fun of me that I was reading a computer organization book while we were flying fighters off in combat. But that was like, for me, that was very peaceful. That class and classes like that prepared me on the technical side. But I have to call out Bria Barthel. I've talked about her a lot. She taught technical and professional communication at RPI, and my senior year, I had one of those annoying holes that I had to fill where I needed to take an elective, and the only one that would fit, I wish Bria was here, I talk to her all the time, but the only one that would fit was that class. Zero interest in taking that class. That class, that was the most useful class that I took for my career. Wow. Learning how to digest technical information, write and report it out so that people could understand it, either at an RPI graduate level or at a 5th grade level. That class I have leaned on my whole life.
Wow. So Professor Anderson, Jacob is a senior. We need to get him in that class next semester.
I don't know if you're still up in that class. I know Bria's retired.
So Jacob DiNacenzi is a senior in aeronautical engineering, and he asked, what was the most difficult part of astronaut training, and what was the most fun?
Most difficult part, it's hard to leave the job that you had. Everybody that comes here loved the job that they had. It's hard to leave that job and come into a new environment, a new culture. I think that's culture shock for your family, for you. That was hard. But the most physically and mentally taxing, which we saw earlier today, was learning how to do a spacewalk. Spending 6.5 hours in a spacesuit. We train underwater just up the road at Neutral Buoyancy Lab. If you watch it on TV as a human, you can endure about 5 minutes of it before you're crying in boredom. But when you're in that when you're in that spacesuit doing it, it is so physically intense working against that pressure suit. You come out and you're just done. Like, you got no mental capacity left and no physical capacity left. That is by far the most difficult thing. And then doing a spacewalk in space. It's game day and everything is on the line. You don't want to hurt the $100 billion space station. You don't want to die. You don't want to make a mistake. It's like you're gained up for 8 to 10 hours on a spacewalk, and you're done at the end of that. Wow. I wanted to go home, but I got to do a couple more. And in between my 2 spacewalks, I got to talk to RPI at an alumni or at the reunion event, which was really a great break for me. The most fun part, the whole reason you do this is just to see the Earth from space. I mean, you could talk about all the grand reasons to be an astronaut, but at the end of the day, I think everybody does it because they want to see the Earth from space. And when you get that first opportunity to look out the window from 250 miles up in low Earth orbit and see how beautiful our planet is, there's no photo that does it justice. There's no video that compares to being a human with our brain and I really think when you look at the Earth, it is your whole life that is building the image that you see. So when Victor Glover looks at it, his childhood was different than mine and he sees it differently. When Christina looks at it, she sees it differently. And I see it through my life. And I mean, my crew took 300,000 pictures of Earth and no one asked us to take a single one of those. Like, there was never a moment where we looked down at Earth and didn't immediately reach for a camera. Whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a flood, whether it's a beautiful sunny day, whether it's a lightning storm over France at night, it's so insanely beautiful. That's
awesome. And you actually we were talking earlier about the commencement speaker for 1981, Harrison Schmidt.
Harrison Schmidt, the second to the last man on the moon, because he flew with Gene Cernan. But.
Yeah, and he talked to you about, I think you said he was envious of how far you're going to be from the moon and the view it's going to offer you of the moon.
We will, in Apollo, they were in low lunar orbit. They were about 60 miles off the surface of the moon. And when we go around the far side, we'll be about 1 Earth diameter away from the moon, about 6,000 miles, which at first is like disappointing. Like, you want to land, and then you want to be as close as humanly possible. But talking to Apollo, the Apollo astronauts, they're very envious of looking out and seeing the whole moon there on the far side, a view that no human has ever had. It'll be very, very awesome if we get to experience that.
You'll take a picture, right?
I will definitely take there are 4 windows on Orion, and there are 4 crew members. We only have 2 digital SLRs, but we will be swapping those around. And we have 2 lenses. One's a long lens, and one's more of a wide angle. But we will be, we've already worked with the control teams, and they will be pointing the spacecraft perfectly for us to view that as we go around the far side of the moon.
And you'll text it to me?
As soon as we get back, we'll have 45 minutes loss of signal on the far side of the moon. So when we regain signal, if we have good optical comm, I'll try to get a picture to you.
Awesome. If you can, I'll understand.
All right, thanks.
We'll wait till you laugh. Okay, Connor Whitley is a senior dual major in aeronautical and mechanical engineering. Connor asks, will there be a time when astronauts are no longer needed and robotics and automation will take over?
Absolutely not. It is in humans' DNA to explore. If you would tell me right now that no person in here ever needs to go on a hike again, no person ever needs to go on a walk around the block again, no person ever needs to go on a cruise or go on a people vacation to go experience things for themselves. There's no photo on Instagram that is a substitute for your desire to go explore as a human. Like, it is in all of us. Robotics are important, but that is in all of us.
Great answer. Arden Adamo, a senior in aeronautical engineering, asks, is there a plan in place to manage orbital debris encountered during the mission? During your time on the International Space Station, did you ever have to perform evasive maneuvers from orbital debris?
Definitely had to perform evasive maneuvers from orbital debris. It is not crazy. It's not like a U-turn in a car with tires skidding. Really, all we do is just change our orbital velocity a tiny bit. That'll either raise us up and speed us up, or raise us up and slow us down, or lower us and speed us up. A little counterintuitive. And that's how we avoid space debris that is tracked. The International Space Station is covered in little pockmarks and dents and little chips in the windows. Orbital debris is a huge problem, and it's getting more and more intense up in low Earth orbit especially. And one of the most telling things, I wish I had a PowerPoint. You know, NASA runs by PowerPoint. Somebody joked if we printed the PowerPoint slides in the Orion program out, it would actually stretch to the moon. But I was interested to study the highest risk for my crew for Artemis II. The highest risk is after we launch, we have to do 2 laps between 600 miles and 200 miles as we approach perigee around the Earth. It's that band, 600 to 200 miles, that is the highest risk part of the mission for us by far because of space debris. High velocity impact with space debris in that part of the mission is the biggest chance of loss of mission and loss of crew.
Wow.
There's way other things that I'm worried about, because if I hit something at 28,000 miles an hour coming around the far side of the Earth, well, my time is due, and there's nothing I can do about that.
Oh, boy. It's still a high-risk
Very high risk.
Wow. I mean, and in some ways, I think, we take it for granted, but God bless you for what you're doing. So Isabel de Simone, a junior in aeronautical engineering, wanted to know, as advice to future astronauts, what are some sacrifices that most people don't know about, personally and professionally? Have either of your daughters shown interest in following in your footsteps?
Nope.
And becoming an astronaut? Maybe that relates to the first part of the question.
I mean, all their friends' parents are astronauts, so it's like the most cliche thing in this town. They really don't have that desire, but they're both teenagers right now, so not every day is glorious, but it's so neat to watch them building their little lives out and seeing their personalities come and what they want to do. And so my high school senior is starting to really vector towards kind of psychology or architecture. I know it's really diverse, 2 fields, but it's neat to see her develop. And then my younger daughter had a good experience in the ER previously this year, and so she's really thinking about nursing because she knows how much that person helped her. So that was really amazing. I'm going to answer the sacrifice for an astronaut in a way that no one would expect. But I have, after working in this industry for 15 years now and being the chief, I got to be honest, the biggest sacrifice you make when you come to do this job is leaving behind your previous job. At this point, we don't hire people that are at the bottom of their field. We are hiring people that are really changing the world in the job that they're in, whether they're engineers, scientists, pilots, medical doctors, and that is a sacrifice. To give up the thing that you've worked your life to achieve, and you're at the top, and now we're going to bring you into this organization and put you right at the bottom, and you're going to work your way into this organization. It is a huge sacrifice, and it is one that most people coming in here don't think about, but it is a sacrifice.
Wow, that's a great answer. The last question from Professor Anderson's class comes from Jeff Osborne. He's a senior in aeronautical and mechanical engineering, dual major. How has the experience of being in space changed your perspective on life and our planet?
every astronaut has a different answer to this question, and I think that's a really great thing because everybody should experience this, this thing. For me, the thing I most realized is that Earth is alive. I did not have a deeply religious experience. I didn't find God. I like really nothing changed for me from that perspective other than I always thought we were alive and Earth was something that you use bulldozers to plow around. But Earth is absolutely alive. When you watch the seasons change, when you watch the leaves start to turn brown on the East Coast, and you can see it from space, when you watch the snow line coming down, when you watch a flood, a forest fire that is impacting, you know, the entire country. One of the coolest things I saw was we were coming over South America, over Brazil, and the horizon was just this brown kind of, I've told this story 1,000 times, but this horizon was like this brown, murky color, and I was like, man, that's got to be pollution from Sao Paulo making it all the way up and getting blown around. But it was not. It was a dust storm in the Sahara Desert, blowing Saharan sand all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and it was landing in Brazil. And just imagine waking up in Brazil and you go outside and your car is covered in this really fine layer of brown dust. You just wipe it off and drive to work. But it's from the Saharan Desert. The last time that sand was on Earth was on the Saharan Desert. Like when you get to see all that, you realize our planet is alive. It's a magnificent machine.
Wow, great answers.
Before we wrap up though, how are we doing on time? I haven't looked at my watch.
I'm not-
Are we
that's
just
what I was- how
woefully
are-
behind?
You're doing great. You
Okay.
can do a few Q&A if you want.
And then are we doing a group photo like we talked about?
We'll do a group photo.
Okay.
This is not scripted, but I've gotten to meet Dr. Schmidt, our president, now a handful of times, and I think we would all be at a loss if we didn't just get to hear like 1 minute about where the university is now and where you're taking it, because you just have such a great vision, and I personally am so appreciative of what you're doing up there right now. I would love to put you on the spot for a minute and just hear that.
That's not a minute. But let me try, and thanks for giving me a warning. No, what I've said to Reid and a number of the people that we met with today, when Lynn and I were presented with the opportunity to return to RPI after 41 years or so, Lynn had gone to school in Washington, D.C., but had spent time at RPI while I was a student. When I was first approached about the position, I said, it's pretty much a hard no, but let me at least give it a look. And we went out to Troy, looked around, and I realized that I think RPI and the Capital Region are at what I consider to be a really transformative moment. And in two ways. One is that I think there's enormous potential for RPI to work with institutions in the region to really accelerate the economic activity in the region, and by virtue of that, RPI. And so a lot of what we're focusing our energy on is what is it that we can do where we either take advantage or of unfair advantages in the region, or we can create unfair advantage by partnering with other institutions in the region. The CHIPS Act, the $52 billion CHIPS Act, is a huge opportunity for the Capital Region and for RPI, simply because for 40 years, New York State has been working to build an ecosystem of semiconductors in the region and has done it. And a lot of that investment in reshoring is going to happen in upstate New York. And so we're looking at that. We're looking at saying, what are the things we can do that really will advance RPI and the region? And I think it's important. I think the country cannot survive with just the superstar cities, the Bostons, the New Yorks, the San Franciscos, Los Angeleses. And there's been a lot of economic study that suggests that if major metropolitan areas like the Capital Region can get their act together, they can really rise for a lot of reasons that are constraining some of these superstar cities. So for me, that's a tremendous opportunity for RPI, for the region, and particularly timely as we approach our 200th birthday to think about the future together. When I took the job, when I decided to apply and then was panicked that they might not actually offer me the job, when I decided to apply, I had some view of that potential. 15 months in, I can confidently say that I underestimated the potential and the opportunity for RPI. So for alumni of RPI, I can say this with all sincerity, I think it's an incredibly bright future ahead of us. So, but thanks for asking, Reid. So There's time for some questions. Oh. That's to you.
I'm not letting you off the hook.
Do we have a microphone? Okay, so.
The first question is always the hardest.
Yeah. Anybody, brave souls? Questions for Reid alone? Okay. And if you don't mind identifying yourself, then that would be helpful.
All right, so I'm Alex Popov. I'm an aeronautical graduate of class of 2021.
Wow. There you go.
So you mentioned that you have a dream, like kind of like with the whole low Earth commercial development program of seeing that. Do you have any concerns with regards to that, of like that will eventually transition to something more so like the defense industry, where there's been recent reports where they're like overcharging the U.S. government for various things? Do you have any concerns that will potentially spiral into that direction?
Might be worth a repeat of the question.
So do I have concerns with, as we bring in private partnerships into human space exploration and like NASA, Artemis, and commercial destinations in the space station, do I ever worry that these private companies will then, almost in my mind, I'll rephrase your question to have a monopoly and begin to overcharge the government for these services? So far, what I am seeing is exactly the opposite, where we are going out with firm fixed price contracts, not letting them balloon, and getting a service provided for a significant taxpayer savings. And while we're doing that, the intellectual property remains with the company, which is a huge deal, and it allows them to maintain control of their proprietary information with a little bit of government oversight. So I do think that is really good. I also understand money has been very cheap for the last 10 years, and as interest rates are going up, we will likely see consolidation in these industries, and there's a potential that could happen in the future. But at least from what I have seen in the last 10 years, this has been an extremely positive experience. And we were very cautious moving into it. And I was very much a doubter, but watching my friends, Bob and Doug, launch on the first crewed vehicle on SpaceX, and the team that we built with SpaceX, and the passion that I saw in those engineers building that vehicle, as an American, it should make you very proud. Like, these are really great people.
Great question. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Gary Godfrey from the class of 81 and 82. Marty, this question's for you.
No!
What do you see as the top 3 issues with RPI for the next 10 years, and what's the solutions?
Reid, do you want to answer that?
I can take a stab at it. I think for sure what we are going to need from our alumni is a couple of dollars every now and then. If we could just get you to think about the future with a few dollars, that would really help.
That's a great answer.
I'm certain I'm going to be fired by NASA tomorrow.
No, I think that we're looking at all these areas where, as I said earlier, we can create this unfair advantage that helps propel RPI forward in almost like a leapfrog. I talked about chips. A couple of weeks ago, we had the groundbreaking for the installation of a quantum computer on the RPI campus. And so in January, RPI will be the first university in the world to have a quantum computer on its campus. Now you might ask, well, why? Why would you do that, Marty? The answer is, first of all, because Curtis Preem, who is one of our alumni, who is also the founder of NVIDIA, has been extremely generous in helping us acquire that quantum computer. But what we're trying to do there is really say, there will be, right now the quantum computers work and you can program them and they'll solve things, but they're not at the performance level where they'll achieve what you might call quantum supremacy, where they can solve a problem significantly faster than a classical computer. But that time will come, whether it's in 5 years, whether it's in 4 years, whether it's in 10 years, we don't know exactly. But when that happens, everybody's going to be scrambling to figure out what problems are really quantum computers good for, in finance, in weather prediction, in material science and chemistry. That'll be the first challenge everybody will be facing when they're there. The second challenge will be will be, how do we teach people to use a quantum computer? How do we integrate quantum computing into, say, an undergraduate curriculum? And what we hope to do by having a quantum computer on the campus in January is begin that discovery. Start figuring out what are they going to be good for when they are performing at the level we anticipate. And what do we need to do to the curriculum to prepare our students for a quantum computer enabled future. And for the alums, you can appreciate that I tend to think of this as RPI skating to where the puck is going to be. All right? In a few years, that's where the puck's going to be. And if we can get the university ahead of that, that's kind of the leapfrog opportunity. And they won't all work out, but we're looking for those opportunities to propel the university forward. And Reid's comment is absolutely true. We are going to need support to get there in a lot of forms, but alumni engagement, I think, is certainly a big part of it. So thanks for the question. Probably nobody wants to ask me a question again.
I'll take them.
There you go. Here we go.
Good evening. My name is Carson Hula, 2021 undergrad aeronautical engineering major. And my question's for Commander Wiseman. Thank you for your time this evening. Having flown on the International Space Station and now serving as the commander of Artemis II, I want to know if you've already found or do you anticipate finding a lesson learned from the International Space Station program that you think will best carry over to what you'll see on Orion flying around the moon? Thank you.
Great. Like what we will. Oh, I think that's almost limitless. On a strategic top level, I'm swimming in this every single day, where the coalition we built on the International Space Station, that is paying huge dividends on Artemis just in general. Like, we already have all the contract mechanisms to know how to work with international companies. Export control is a huge hurdle. Working our way through all of that. How do we barter? How do we get companies that maybe can't pay but can build? How do we get them contributing? And we know the power of, like, the first time a French astronaut steps foot on the lunar surface, like, what is going to happen in that country is just going to be crazy. United Arab Emirates, Japan, Canada, I'm flying with a Canadian, just seeing how all of that, that stuff, it matters so much to the world, and going as an international community matters huge. And then I made a joke the other day in crew training on Orion that every single lesson that has ever been learned in human spaceflight has been engineered into this vehicle. The redundancy, the system capabilities, I see the marks of Apollo in it everywhere, but I also see the marks of the space station in it everywhere I look, and the space shuttle. And so just understanding how do we smartly use computers? They don't have to be a quantum computer on an Orion spacecraft, but they absolutely have to be robust against cosmic radiation, and they have to be super fault tolerant, failure resistant. I see all of that just working its way in. The specifics for Orion, our environmental control life support system, our CO2 scrubbing capability is an amine swing bed. We had a test unit on the space station. I operated that in 2014 when I was up there. Our toilet that we have on Orion is on the space station right now. So we have very much leveraged our low Earth orbit platform, our laboratory up there, to create reliable systems for Orion. So it's pretty neat to see all that stuff coming together.
Don has a question over here.
Elise Romberger, class of 2016. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing space exploration in the next 5, 10, or 20 years?
I would say a lot of my answers come because I was the chief astronaut and I saw things on just kind of a different stage. But you always worry about public and political support. Like, NASA is a political organization. We are funded by the US taxpayer, and we basically work for Americans and for Congress. And that oversight level on Congress is very important. So just right now, the bipartisan support on Capitol Hill it's truly amazing. Keeping that. Going out and doing great things, keeping the interest of the politicians and the US taxpayer, I think, is critical. That is one of the big struggles. You always worry about a failure and a setback from that, but that is just part of going out and trying to do something bold and great. And then I worry a little bit about competition. Like, we're United States of America. We do not like to come in second, as history has shown. And so competition is good, but we have got to stay at the front. We have got to be challenging ourselves, and we have got to work fast and efficient and safe. I think that's probably the best I can do for you.
Okay, one more. Where are we at? Back there?
two back there.
Dawn's got it.
My name is Emilia, and my brother's a freshman at RPI.
All right.
And
Remember, like, email him or text him tonight and just make sure he's okay, all right? Just lift him up a little bit.
okay.
I'm kidding.
I was wondering, when do you think the first person will step on Mars?
When do I think the first person will step on Mars is a question that I would say, honestly, if we had the willpower right now to just go do that, I think we could do it in 5 to 10 years. I think we have most of the technical hurdles met. Mind you, it's about a 6-month mission out there. And then you, based on where Mars is around the sun, if you want to come home, that's another 6 months. And then you probably are spending either a very short amount of time on Mars, or you're spending 500 days on Mars to let Mars and Earth sync back up around the sun. So there's a lot of challenges there. I would say, look at what SpaceX is doing right now down in Boca Chica. Sometimes these new ways of thinking about things can open up entirely new doors that you never thought were possible. So where is Starship in 5 years? Are they routinely flying to low Earth orbit? Have they landed NASA astronauts on the lunar surface? Do they have their low Earth orbit refueling system going that SpaceX is trying to work on? If all those blocks are starting to get checked, then I think we're really close to having humans on Mars. If we change the calculus and say we want to send 10 people and you don't have to come back to Earth, like you are going to go try to settle on Mars, that changes the calculus, and that would speed things up a little bit. So I think there's a lot of positive that we could be there in 10 years. I would also say if Jack Schmidt and Gene Cernan and the Apollo guys were up here, they would say the exact same thing. We could be there in 10 years. So we've been 10 years away for 50 years. So it just, I say that because it's just going to take courage. There's a great inscription in the wall of Congress in the Space and Science Subcommittee. It's engraved in the wood there. And I think about it all the time. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And so when you're laying out the vision for RPI, when our government is laying out the vision for human space exploration, when NASA is laying out the vision for what they want to achieve, if we had a global effort where that vision was go to Mars, we would go a lot quicker. When I go out to SpaceX and I see the employees walking around, they are almost all wearing shirts that say Occupy Mars, because that was Elon's tagline. And when you see that, like, to them, it isn't impossible to go inhabit Mars. And I think where there is no vision, the people perish. You put that vision out there and say, let's go, and you get an international team together, I think we go. Great question.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up and then I think Matt will probably come up and give us our instructions for the photo, which will make you all famous. But I want to say that we had a lovely, this has been a phenomenal day with you, Reid, and the excitement that I felt like a kid talking to you about all the things you're going to be doing. And I can tell you, we were outside in front of the, what's that thing called that SpaceX made for you?
What's that?
The SpaceX thing, what's it called?
The booster out there?
The booster.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Falcon 9, it's a Falcon 9.
Oh, the Falcon 9, okay. Just rolls off the tongue.
Right.
And we're talking, and Reid's explaining, and all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, there's the moon." And I thought, wow, when he looks at it, he's got to think about something entirely different than what the rest of us are thinking about. So it was exciting, and it's just his energy, his enthusiasm, it's palpable, and I think he's such an amazing ambassador for the space program and frankly for RPI. So we're really grateful for that. But when we met this morning, we did some interviews and things like that. Reid walks in with this very cool NASA jacket. But at the end of the interview, he took it off. Do you want to do the reveal?
Well, I'm wearing an RPI shirt.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorites right here. Yeah.
So I figured you got to represent. So I invite you to come back when the shop is open, because you can get an Artemis golf shirt.
Yes.
So with that, Matt, thanks. Or Matt's going to do the instructions, but Reid, thanks so much.
You're quite welcome. And thank you. And I really want to thank people traveled here, and I thank you. It is really neat to look out and see pretty much a pack. I mean, this is 250 people. It's an amazing turnout. A lot of great RPI grads. Thanks for coming out and listening to myself and Dr. Schmidt talk. It really means a lot to me to see all of you here. I hope Space Center Houston took great care of you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I really appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing, and it's just awesome.
And we promised Reid that he'd get back to his daughters promptly at 8:30, so you'll be able to mingle a little bit.
I'll mingle and then I'll run.
But then he'll run. With no apologies.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, thank you again.